Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tamas Piatoli, sports dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and today I'm going to be your host. As a sports dietitian, one of the many questions I had to answer from athletes, especially those competing in high school and collegiate sports, is whether gaining lean muscle would slow them down. The perception was that if they could lose weight or get significantly leaner, they would get faster. Is this true? And does a lighter athlete run faster, have more energy, or perform better than someone with more muscle mass? In this podcast, we speak with world-renowned sports dietitian Nancy Clark, where we cover her 30 years of experience working with athletes who are focused on physique over performance. We talk about the risk associated with the pressure from coaches and parents, the impact of being lighter has on health and performance, the potential health risk, and what are the nutritional interventions that she has implemented with athletes to enhance performance and strength. Nancy, who is a sports nutrition and a certified specialist in sports dietetics, counsels both competitive athletes and casual exercises in her successful private practice in the Boston area. She has extensive experience helping thousands of active clients, from ordinary mortals to Olympians, win with good nutrition. Her nutrition advice and photo has even graced the back of the Wheaties box. She has been the team nutritionist for the Boston Red Sox. Her best-selling book, Nancy Clark's Sports Nutrition Guidebook, has sold over 800,000 copies and is now available in its 6th edition. Nancy also writes a monthly nutrition column called The Athlete's Kitchen, which appears regularly in over 100 sports and fitness publications and websites. We'd like to thank our partners at Gatorade for sponsoring this podcast. Nancy, welcome to the All Me podcast. It's an honor to have you here today.
Well, this is my pleasure to be here, Tavis.
I know we've known each other a long time. You've done phenomenal work in the field of sports nutrition, and today's topic is going to be pretty unique. It's a topic that I know in my line of work, just like yours, we've got a lot of questions about, hey, if I'm lighter and I'm leaner, does that equal faster? You're going to answer a lot of cool questions. I'm looking forward to getting these answers. But before we dive into the topic, we always want to learn about, a little bit about you. People are going to know your bio. They see your bio. They've heard that already, but let's learn a little bit more about why you chose to get into the field of sports nutrition. What got you that interest?
I was doing some nutrition education, and as an educator, one of the groups that I was teaching was teachers and coaches. I was teaching nutrition to the people that teach nutrition. And when I was giving the workshops to the coaches, it's like, I need to know more about nutrition and exercise. I had been doing a lot of, outdoor activity myself. I've always been a hiker, biker, cross-country skier kind of person. I'm pre-Title IX, so I was never an athlete as today's athletes are. So I got into it more as a recreational exerciser on the personal level, and on a professional level more because I was giving workshops to coaches and they were asking me questions that I need to know more about this. So I had been a registered dietitian, and I went back to grad school and got my master's degree in nutrition with a focus on exercise physiology. Because at that time, this was like in 1979, there weren't many degrees or programs that specialized in nutrition for exercise or sports nutrition. So when I first started, I had a little private practice. Well, it wasn't it wasn't meant to be a private practice. I was part of a sports medicine practice, and thinking that, the doctors and the physical therapists and the podiatrists and orthopods would all send their clients to me, but they just looked at the stress fracture. They didn't look like what's behind the stress fracture. They just looked at broken bones and they weren't very good at referring. So essentially I had had a private practice within this sports medicine practice and had to do a lot of marketing and teaching people about the value of sports nutrition. So it's a real pleasure today to see they're like two generations of sports dietitians underneath me. And it's just a pleasure to see how much the field has grown and how much it's gotten integrated into performance teams and how it's really making a difference. So I would say that, at my time, I was considered a pioneer in sports nutrition. And now it's just a pleasure to see that the field is really doing great.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this, and your guidebook, your sports nutrition guidebook, as I mentioned, I was, I'm not going to go into, this is not about me and I'm not going to go, but it's really more about how I discovered you, and really what got me into the field of sports nutrition is kind of your guidebook, because there were no 25 years ago, 22 years ago, whatever it was, there were no sports nutrition courses. I was an undergrad at LSU. I didn't have the best GPA. I was flipping through a curriculum book. I wanted to be pre-med. I lost a bunch of weight that year after playing high school football as a lineman, and really enjoyed feeling better, and saw sports nutrition. After I bombed my first semester, I saw sports nutrition in the curriculum under dietetics. And I was like, wow, I love sports. I lost weight. Let's do that. And then graduate, come across, everyone's like, you got to read Nancy's book on, sports nutrition guidelines for athletes. And I'm like, great. I go to grad school. I didn't get an internship. And that was like my first taste of what sports nutrition was in education. And then, and then here we are, 20 something years later on a podcast together. So I'm just thankful to have people like yourself to help guide me, because without your book, probably I wouldn't have worked in the field of sports nutrition.
Well, thanks for that nice story. And I'll tell you, Tavis, I hear a lot of stories like that. And it just really, it nourishes my soul to know that I've made a difference in people's careers, to say nothing their performance. So thanks for those kind words. And yes, my sports nutrition guidebook has been around for about 30 years now. So it's in its sixth edition. And little did I think that when I first got into sports nutrition, I'd be author of this best-selling sports nutrition guidebook. But that was basically written as a means to market my practice so I could get people into my office and work with them one-on-one. I mean, it's a long story, but I'm glad that the book has thrived.
That's going to be in the show notes, so be sure y'all check that out. Now, let's dive into today's question, or today's topic. Today's topic is, does lighter and being leaner equal being faster? First, let's define what lighter, leaner equals faster mindset is about. So can you explain a little bit about what that mindset is for an athlete?
That mindset is just prevalent among weight-oriented sports. I talked to a runner and they say, if I'm just lighter, I'll be a faster runner. I talked to a cyclist. That power to weight ratio, I've just got to be lighter so I can pedal up those hills faster than everybody else. So it's among the first things that my clients say. I have a private practice where I work a lot with people one-on-one. And inevitably, the reason that people seek me out is that they're frustrated because they're having trouble losing the weight. They want to be lighter and leaner and faster. But they're just totally frustrated. And I think, most athletes think this way so much because of a lot of it is social media and social pressure. I mean, we live in this weight-obsessed world. And yes, lighter, leaner works to a certain extent, but there's also a cost to it.
Yeah, you mentioned, why do some athletes feel this way? And I think you kind of said there's some pressure, right? And we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit later, because I have a few questions related to pressure when it comes to this. But is there a particular age in which you see this type of thinking? Does it start at a young age? Does it vary all over? What have you seen in your practice?
It starts at an incredibly young age. 80% of fourth grade girls have been on a diet, so that they're already concerned about weight and image. And you look at the clothing that athletes wear, and it's, tight fitting Lycra. And it's like, so that, at a young age, athletes are very sensitive about their bodies. And so I'd say initially the concern comes not about being a better athlete, but it's like looking better in tight fitting uniform.
Yeah, I have a 12-year-old daughter, so I'm very conscious about the way I talk to her about food, nutrition, her body. I don't say anything, obviously, about her physique or anything like that. I want her to to figure these things out on her own, but also come to me and her mom and ask questions when she has concerns and she's hearing different things, because she's she's 5'8.5", 5'9", and kids will be like, they just say awful things. We've all done it. And I go back and go, man, I wish I would have said some of the things, because I was a bigger guy and people tease me and we teased each other back, but we don't realize how much that can hurt somebody. And, you mentioned it starts at a young age, especially in young girls are probably more prevalent, but let's look at certain types of sports. Are there sports where we see certain athletes go, if I'm lighter or leaner, I'm faster? Is it more prevalent in certain types of sports?
I would say the sports where weight makes an impact. So we can look at ballet dancers and dancers in general. We can look at runners, cyclists, gymnasts. So any of the leanness focused sports, but it's not limited to that, because, beach volleyball, I mean, look at what they're wearing. The women are wearing like nothing. So talk about being conscious about their body that is totally exposed. So I would say just about any sport has the athletes have their issue with body image.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, in some of the practice I've been in working with athletes over the years, like yourself, I've seen even, male baseball players, a question, for their position. It might be a shortstop. He's 6'3", but 160 pounds. And the coach is like, and even the prospects or college prospects are like, if you bulk up, that would be great. You would add more power. But his question is, well, am I going to get slower? Right? Like, am I going to, if being heavier, is it going to make me slower? And it's like, well, it depends on what type of body weight. If you put on lean mass, then your engine gets more, gets stronger. It's like it goes from an F-150 to a 250. So I love how you mentioned, that mindset is, if I gain any weight or if I get lighter, does it make me run faster? Right? I've seen that in the cross country world when you mentioned the runner. So I love that. I love that answer.
Yeah. And there are stories about people with eating disorders that got lighter and slower. And then when they started fueling better and restoring their bodies to a heavier weight, they got faster. And so, lighter, leaner does not always mean faster, better.
Now, you mentioned pressure earlier, and that's kind of what I want to lead into for this next question. Do you feel there's pressure from coaches and parents that are encouraging athletes to be lighter and leaner for a sport? Have you seen that before?
Historically, yes. Coaches were very much into measuring body fat. And, some coaches would measure it every week and just putting the focus on weight and how if you're, lighter, you'll be better. So definitely that has been factored in the past. And now I think a lot of coaches are just petrified of even mentioning, issues about weight out of fear of creating an eating disorder. In terms of parents, there are always parents that pressure their kid. I had one figure skater whose parents would just grab food out of her hand and say, no, you need to be lighter and leaner so that you can jump higher. And I mean, it was really abusive. And so, yes, that does exist. And I think we need to do a lot of coach and parent education, particularly that bodies change. And you were talking about your 12-year-old daughter, and, you don't talk to her about weight, but I think in general, everybody needs to be talking about how bodies change. And the body of a 9-year-old isn't the body of a 10 or an 11 or 12-year-old. And the body of a 12-year-old isn't the body of a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old. And so if we can just educate all these athletes from a very young age that bodies change, they're supposed to change. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be slower. They're going to be, more powerful. And like you look at runners and you get these young runners that are all focused on being lighter and leaner, but most runners don't peak till their late 20s.
Yeah, that's interesting to know that. I mean, and that's something a lot of these young runners would probably benefit from hearing from, is like, look, you're still developing. You have a long ways to go. So don't focus on now, look at the long progression. So are there other influencers like athletes or magazines? You mentioned people might be looking at things on TV, but what have you seen in regards to like athletes or magazines. Do we see other athletes may look into that, and that may play a role in the decision when they see certain type of people looking like others?
For certain. I mean, there's a lot of thought that goes into who's on the cover of Runner's World. And, usually they don't choose the middle of the pack runner. They choose, of course, the faster runners who happen to be leaner, but do they have an eating disorder? Is that authentic? Do they have an authentic body that they're modeling? So magazines, I really think that social media these days is just so prevalent, and teens spend so much time on social media, so that I see that as certainly a big factor. I am pleased that on TV and on ads these days, they are showing many, many different types of bodies. And so that there is a cultural change that is happening. But it's a process. It's a process. But as a nation, if 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese, we need to honor that it is natural to have diversity in body sizes and shapes, and not everybody is supposed to look like, a runner. And like, what does a runner look like? I've got air quotes around runner. And everybody knows what a runner looks like, thin and, strong and, running like the wind. And that's not the way that it always is. I mean, in the dog kingdom, dogs come in different sizes and shapes. And in the human kingdom, humans also come in different sizes and shapes, as do athletes.
When we look at, we've talked about the pressure side, we've talked about kind of defining this, but let's kind of look at the dietary side of things. So when you look at someone's diet who is trying to become lighter and leaner, what type of change do you see they are trying to implement to reach these goals? How are they changing their diet or are they changing their diet to get lighter and leaner?
Oh, they definitely are changing their diets. And the first thing they cut out are carbs. And again, I've got air quotes over carbs, just the way that they say it. It's just like, oh, those evil carbs, they're so fattening. And it's like, one, carbohydrates are not fattening. The conversion of carbohydrate into body fat happens to be a very tough conversion. People more preferentially burn off carbs than they do dietary fat. So that would be the first thing. The second thing that they might do is become vegetarian. And certainly they report being lactose intolerant. So there goes dairies, and then they've given out meat, and but basically carbs, which, I remind them that fruits and vegetables are carbs. And that sort of baffles them, when what they really mean is, just the refined, ultra processed foods that tend to be yummy.
Now, yeah, carbs are demonized. It's so unfortunate. Now we have carnivore, and people are like, just eat meat all day and don't eat any carbs. And obviously the keto diet and many other diets where you see athletes partake in these things thinking, hey, if I do this, what's going to happen to my body? And it's like, well, are you trying to eat for physique, or are you trying to eat for performance? Because there are two different types of diets, right? And that's kind of concerning, because do you see some of these behaviors like this? Could they be similar to like an eating disorder?
They certainly are very similar to an eating disorder, and many of them do have eating disorders. And I was just reading a journal article this morning where 2/3 of the athletes had, they were screened and were at moderate to high risk for eating disorders. And these were athletes, runners that reported to a doctor for stress fractures. And so that they came to this, physician's office because they had a stress fracture, and they did this survey, and they found that, 2/3 of them, were at moderate to high risk for eating disorders. So it's there, but it oftentimes it gets covered up. But just like I say, just eliminating, oh, I drink milk, I get a stomach ache, or, oh, I don't like milk. Okay, get rid of dairy. Phew, don't have to deal with those calories. Oh, I'm vegetarian. Yeah, Do they add in beans if they delete the beef? No, but they live on lettuce leaves instead, which we know is a problem. And the carbohydrate thing, that's the best fuel for their muscles. So if they're eliminating carbs, they really aren't able to perform at their best. And that's why they're so tired all the time. And it just really hurts their performance.
So I would think these type of approaches that they're taking to get lighter and leaner, could these actually be types of changes that could be counterintuitive and cause muscle loss?
Yeah, there are unintended consequences. They think they're eating healthy and doing the right thing. But, an apple is a healthy food. A diet of all apples is a very unhealthy diet. So it's the extremes. And we all know, balance, moderation, is the route to go. But the lighter, leaner athletes, they're just on a mission to lose body weight at any cost. And the cost is muscle loss. And the cost is reduced performance. And then that makes them want to be even lighter and leaner because, if I must still be too heavy. And it's like, no. You're just underfueled.
So you mentioned kind of what my next question was how does this impact performance? So, with muscle loss, my assumption is you're going to see a reduction in obviously energy and power and recovery and all those things on court or on field. You're probably just not going to be seeing what you normally expected to see when you're eating a sufficient amount of calories. Is that correct?
That is very correct. And like I say, people come to me because they're just tired all the time. They're trying to lose weight. They're tired all the time. Their performance is going down. They go, what am I must be doing something wrong. And they're doing a lot wrong. They're looking at food as being fattening and the enemy. And it's really a matter of, changing their mindset so that they realize that food is fuel and that they need to eat like an athlete, which means to surround their workout with food to fuel up and refuel. And not try to stay away from bread and bagels and potatoes and, cookies and ice cream and, just all these carby foods that they wrinkle their nose at.
So I want to shift a little bit to looking at going kind of back to pressure, but also with diet. We know there are some sports that are weight classification sports, like wrestling, boxing, powerlifting. You have to compete in certain weight classes, but for those that don't really focus on the scale, so for those sports that have no scale, that doesn't factor into participation, what advice would you recommend to coaches or parents who are encouraging a young athlete to focus on their body weight to perform?
I would just throw away the scale or keep the scale in the trunk of the car, because the scale doesn't measure the right things. It just provides a number, but it doesn't say if it's muscle or fat. And it just gives a number that these athletes judge themselves by, and they start getting competitive to see who can have the lighter number. So as a coach and as a parent, are you having fun? Sports are supposed to be fun. And with all the pressure in so many ways, sports is becoming less and less fun on many, many levels. And if they're hungry and underfueled, it's just a sad story. So I encourage coaches and parents to make sure that their kids are fueling up to have to play sports, to have a good time, and not to focus in on weight as being an important factor in their performance, but more to develop their skills. And really, when the bodies are developing and changing, and for females laying down fat, that's supposed to happen. Maybe they do have a year where they're slower, or maybe they just have a year when they're more powerful and doing even better. I mean, each athlete is going to do what they're going to do, but to have them look at the long run, not today, but let's look at longevity and career. And we know that the athletes that have been restricting since puberty, that they get sidetracked with injuries like crazy. and they just have a shorter career.
Yeah, the coaches can put a lot of pressure in. They just look at wins and losses as success, right? And I was fortunate to coach two of my daughter's softball teams, and at the end, and we're talking young kids, 9 and 10. At the end, it was just like, if we get better at the end of the year, if you have fun, I don't care if we win or lose, as long as you're smiling and you enjoyed your time. That's what it's all about, right? But there's these travel teams, and it's pressure, and it's like it's all about getting the ring. And if you don't, then it's like, wow, you're doing it for the wrong reasons if that's why you're doing it. So I'm glad you mentioned you got to have that fun component, because if not, then I'll just a quick story. We were on vacation many years ago, and in Florida, there's a little place where there's a little bungee where kids can get on the bungee and jump on a little trampoline, and it sprouts them up. But they made kids weigh themselves, because if they weigh too much, they would not allow them to get on it. And I was just thinking, wow, how disheartening is that? Is if you tell a 10-year-old kid, boy or girl, hey, you weigh too much, you can't get on this. And these are people that don't understand how detrimental that could be to someone's demeanor. I picked the scale up and threw it in the garbage. And then, they shut the ride down for about a good 20 minutes until I brought the scale back. That's a true story. And I was like, what are you doing to these kids' mindset? They're like, well, this is a liability, which I understand. Like someone like me, I shouldn't be on a bungee machine. But a 10-year-old kid, if you tell a girl that, oh, you weigh too much, what is that going to do to her mind? Wow. Right. So at what point do you step in and bring the coach into a meeting, or parents that, hey, look, you're pressuring these kids to lose weight or get leaner? Like, is there a point where have you ever had to have a conversation with a coach about that?
I have not, but I have met with athletes whose coaches have been pressuring them a lot. And I say I've never gotten in the middle of it, but I know that it happens all the time. And I think it's very important to speak up soon and not let things fester and get worse. And people are afraid to speak up to coaches. And so if you're, don't want to talk to the coach, then find out who's the coach's supervisor. Try to find somebody that would be a gatekeeper, or the athletic trainer. Maybe they talk to the coach or something. But my message is, if that coach is pressuring someone, they really need to understand that they are really harming that person and not helping them be the best athlete they can be at all. We know with the coaches that would have body composition measurements like every week or every 2 weeks or every month or however when they do it, those teams, it just hurt it had no positive benefit whatsoever. No positive. The athletes did not perform better because they were lighter or leaner. They were just stressed out and miserable. And so in today's culture, I think it's far easier to approach coaches than historically when they were like gods. But now there's a lot more education, and I like to think that coaches are educated. And like I say, most of the coaches that I deal with they say, Nancy, you talk to them about nutrition. You talk to them about weight. I want to stay out of the middle of this. But I'm not sure that's always the norm. And Tavis, I'm sure you have met many, many coaches who have created problems among their athletes.
No doubt. But I love how you mentioned, coaches at some point before sports dietitians were even a thing or a name. And, in the sports medicine world, coaches were the authority. That's where athletes went. When I was in the collegiate space, there was a coach for our tennis team at the time, told one of the athletes that needed to lose about 10 pounds was, hey, stop eating carbs. And when, and then the athlete was referred to me, and he's like, look, my coach said stop eating carbs. I'm like, no, absolutely not. I said, yeah, having a little bit of weight off may be helpful for you, especially body fat, but we have to do it in a moderate calorie deficit. But carbs are your engine. You're going to lose all your power. And he's like, yeah. He goes, I tried to do this on my own. And instantly within a day, his recovery he was tired all the time, not sleeping well. So I love the fact that you mentioned now coaches are much more approachable. And, we are now in every professional team, every major college sports has multiple full-time sports dietitians on staff, because the coaches are not talking about body fat. They go through the athletic trainer, the sports RD, the strength coach. And that kind of leads to my next question, right? Because when we're talking about the health of the athlete, right, it's not performance now. Now it's a health risk. And Is there a point where you recommend other healthcare providers come into the picture? As let's say someone is constantly getting injured or have a stress fracture because they're losing too much weight and not eating enough. At what point do you say, all right, let's get the team together and let's have a conversation?
Precisely. And isn't it nice now that there are performance teams?
Right.
and not just as isolated as it used to be. There's two aspects of sports nutrition. You work a lot more with teams in schools, high schools, colleges. I work more with one-on-one athletes that not necessarily part of a team. And so what I spend a lot of time doing is creating teams and, making sure that they're getting all the care, that they have a sports psychologist or a therapist, that they have their primary care doctor, that they have a physical therapist, and try to create that team when it doesn't exist. But it is important when someone has an injury to look beyond the injury. Like, why are they over-exercising? Why are they getting injury after injury? What's their diet like? What's their training like? What's pressuring them? Are they happy? Performance is so multifactorial, and it's just, like I say, it's just really a pleasure that today we do have performance teams that focus on more of the whole person, and that there really is a lot more focus on mental health than there ever has been, and that it's getting respected and hopefully taking some of the pressure that often is self-imposed by the athletes themselves. I won't blame just the coaches, but athletes themselves just pressure themselves a lot. So that we do need just a variety of healthcare providers to come into the picture and look at the whole athlete holistically.
Yeah, no, that's so critical. And I love the fact today, like you mentioned, we have teams that we can work together with that all are in the best interest of the athlete. So we talked about, the healthcare provider side and being part of a team, and that's a critical component. But in your one-on-one practice, when you look at certain things like this, if you see an athlete with some potential medical issues, do you request any type of blood work to assess nutritional or health status when you suspect this type of behavior?
The primary thing that I would look at would be anemia and blood work for iron. And it's naive to think that you can be deficient just in one nutrient. So if someone is iron deficient and anemic, that certainly is impacting their performance, but likely other things are too. So that's where I would start. But it's fascinating that when you work with someone with an eating disorder, say someone who has anorexia, and they get blood work, the labs come back, everything's normal, and they go, "Oh, see, I'm healthy, everything's normal." And so blood work doesn't always show the whole picture. I think that just how they feel. Are they peppy, zippy, smiling? Do they have a sparkle in their eye? Are they able to complete their workouts and feel okay at the end? I'm more likely to focus on those things than I am on blood work.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because, like you said, sometimes you got to look at some markers and see if there's anything going on with that athlete. But at the end of the day, it's how are they feeling overall. Now, as a sports dietitian, I'm sure there's things that you need to do and kind of focus on trying to help them overcome that mindset. So what steps are you taking when athletes have this mindset to kind of help them, improve their thinking process to where maybe lighter and leaner, it doesn't always become faster?
Yeah, it's a place that I often start at is body image, because here they are hating their bodies, and anything that jiggles is like bad, and they're just focused on their fatness, which is, their eyes are tainted. Clearly they aren't fat. Females have essential body fat. They have breasts, they have hips, they've got inner thighs. This is all supposed to be there. So look at body image and trying to get them to be grateful for their body and all that their bodies do for them, to recognize that bodies come in different sizes and shapes. And as I mentioned earlier, the dog kingdom, and an example that that I use a lot is like in the dog kingdom, you have St. Bernards and Greyhounds and Labradors and Poodles and Beagles and Chihuahuas. And is a St. Bernard fat? No. If you starve a St. Bernard and it loses a bunch of weight, does it become a Greyhound? No, it's just a miserable St. Bernard. If you let that St. Bernard eat when it's been starved, it just bounces right back to being, a fully fueled and strong and powerful St. Bernard. And so to get these athletes to realize that their body maybe is not the perfect body according to society's image of perfection, but they will never have a perfect body, and nobody does. But have them tell me what kind of dog they are. Maybe they're Labradors, maybe they're Bulldogs, maybe they're St. Bernards, but to be proud of their genetics and be proud of all of their accomplishments. And if they can, accept their body, good. If they can't, then maybe they can at least forgive their body for being what it's not, and be more willing to fuel it and take care of it. And so the first step is accept their body, appreciate it, and be willing to fuel it better, and to notice how much better they perform once their body is fueled. As one of my clients said, oh, so this is what it feels like to be well-fueled and perky. And it's like, yeah, that's what it feels like to be well-fueled and perky. So that's sort of the approach that I take.
Now, from a nutritional intervention standpoint, though, like where do you start with these athletes? Is there something particular that you've seen work in your practice when trying to counsel them on just making dietary modifications?
Well, what I do is I have them look at the benefits. And so the first thing is eat something before you exercise. You have a car, you put gas in it, it goes. You have a body, you put food in it, it goes a lot better. So can you get in 100, 200 calories of, a granola bar, a chunk of bagel, a banana, some raisins, something. Oh no, I don't like to eat before I exercise because my stomach will stick out and, everybody will see it in my tight fitting uniform, which is not at all true, but it's a fear, but it's not a fact. So having them eat something before they exercise and seeing the benefits, to have them include more grains in each meal so that they do have English muffin for breakfast and they have a sandwich instead of a salad for lunch, and that they include some potato or rice or pasta with dinner. And the thing is, they will immediately feel better. And when you fuel well, you don't have to wait around a week or 2 weeks to see the benefits. You see it in the next workout. And so when there's a benefit, people are willing to make the change. So they start eating half a granola bar before they, do their training. And at the end of the training, it's like, oh, I'm not as starved as I used to be. And as hangry, they're in a better mood, they had a better time. And that makes them a lot more willing to move forward with making positive dietary changes.
So it seems like you focus on the performance side, right? More than anything else. It's like, look, let's just start small with something like you said, granola bar, half a granola bar, just get something in your system to help them build trust with the process.
Precisely. They need to trust me. And so often when I start talking about fueling, I just see their eyes glaze over. And I know that they have this voice in their head that's saying, don't listen to her. She's telling you to eat more. If you can't lose weight eating 1,000 calories, what makes you think, you can eat like 1,800 or 2,000 calories without, turning into a blimp? Like, don't listen to her. So I address that voice. I say, do you have a little voice, arguing in your brain right now? And inevitably they say, yeah. And I say, that's just, just calm that voice down. It's just trying to protect you, just trying to keep you from getting fat. But you have to trust the process. And I have them experiment and be curious, just for a day or 2 days. What's the worst thing that can happen in 2 days of proper fueling? And when they have such better workouts, again, that helps to move them forward.
You kind of answered my next question, because my next question was about are they hesitant at first? And you kind of mentioned that it seems like certain individuals are going to be probably a little hesitant to boost their calories up, right? If they've been constantly eating at 1,000 calories or whatever that is.
Yeah, they are hesitant. They're fearful. But if you set it up as an experiment and invite them to be curious, as opposed to, for the rest of your life, you got to eat like a plate of pasta for dinner. I mean, that's just overwhelming. But if one night you have a cup of pasta, well, how do you think you'd perform in the morning? Would you think you'd perform better? And so that most people are willing to, they're willing to experiment for, 2, 3, 4 days, and then they get scared. So it's a matter of reminding them nothing bad has happened. But it's an eating disorder voice, like I say, that's just trying to convince them that they don't need that food, that this is ridiculous. It's like, no, that's where we need, to bring in a therapist to deal with eating disorder issues.
Yeah, and I don't think those individuals without eating disorders understand that mindset, right? They just think, oh, I eat myself for a long time. I thought does that really exist? Do we have two brains that are telling one side saying don't eat, the other side saying eat? I just understand, hey, I'll love to eat, it's food, but then realizing, living with someone who's had those issues, being around that in the profession, it's a real disease. It's a problem that people really struggle with, and it's not something that they just can overcome by eating more.
Precisely. Yeah. And eating disorder is a psychological diagnosis. It is not a nutritional diagnosis.
Right.
And a coach does not cause an eating disorder by measuring body fatness of their athlete, but the athlete can become so stressed out about it and want to control things that they end up controlling their food. And it can be the tipping point. Yeah.
Now, as we kind of getting towards the end of this podcast, let's dive in just real quick about supplementation, because I always like to talk about this and just curious to see from a dietary supplementation viewpoint, are there any supplements or vitamins that you feel would be helpful in improving outcomes, or is this strictly an individualized approach depending on the type of athlete in your case?
Oh, dietary supplements. I really focus in on food and try to get over their fear of food. So if somebody is eating poorly, you can take a multivitamin, a 1-day kind of a thing for health insurance, but food is so much more than just vitamins. It's all these phytochemicals and bioactive compounds that are so health protective. So my job as the dietitian is really to teach them how to get the nutrition that they need through the foods that they're choosing, and how to get adequate protein, and how many, what does 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal look like? And so I am a big believer that food and the matrix that the food comes in is really worthy of being honored. So I'm not a big supplement person myself, but there's always a time and a place for them, particularly if someone's anemic, they need to take iron. And if they need more calcium, and if they're lactose intolerant and not willing to have alternative sources of calcium, then, anything is better than nothing. So yes, there is a time and a place for supplements, but I think there's a major focus that needs to be put on nutrition education.
As we close out, yeah, and I agree 100%. I think, some people just want to, hey, give me a pill or powder, right? And let's solve this problem. And as you mentioned, this is a food first approach. You can't overcome these struggles with just taking something, no matter what the condition, whether it's getting lighter, gaining weight, losing weight. We have to do this through behavior modification. So I love the fact that you focus on the food first approach model. That is so critical. Now, as we close out, are there any topics we didn't discuss today that you feel is important to address?
I think we really covered the gamut, Tavis, and it's just important to address this topic and to address puberty, how the body changes during puberty, because people don't talk about that, and that girls get menstrual periods And like coaches need to be able to talk about that. And so it just becomes normalized. And that's where I think, the wave of the future in terms of educating. We've educated coaches that don't measure body fat unless there's a really good reason to do it. And there's an excellent book put out by Swim Australia. It's called Performing in Lycra. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. You can Google Performing in Lycra, and it's a conversation guide, for athletes who perform in Lycra, which is often swimmers and gymnasts and dancers and runners and cyclists and, all of these weight conscious sports, all these tight fitting uniforms. But that conversation guide is downloadable and it's excellent. And it really gets people thinking about how do we handle, bodily changes for young athletes. And once we master the ease of conversing about puberty, bodily changes, body fat, menstrual periods, it'll be a lot easier to prevent people from going down that bad rabbit hole that, lighter is leaner, eating less is better.
Yeah, that's a critical topic. And we definitely want to include that information in the show notes so that way people can have access to that because everybody needs to read that, especially for female athletes as well. Now, we're not done with you yet. You're not aware of this. We have what's called the curveball round, and our curveball round we do with every podcast guest. Now, it's questions that have nothing to do with today's topic. They're just randomly things I make up. There are 3 questions. They're fun. They're a little challenging, but are you up for it?
Sure.
All right. So the first question is a staple. I ask every single guest of mine. I'm a music junkie. If I could go back and start over again, I would do something in the music career versus the nutrition career. Nothing wrong with that, but I just love music. So if you could be any singer in any band, previous or today, who would that be?
Oh, I'd be Mary of Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Interesting. Okay. So my ex-brother-in-law played in a Peter, Paul, and Mary cover band, and they toured New York and Boston. Really interesting. So he played guitar, but that's a great answer. What would something Nancy of today? So you've been through your career. What would Nancy today go back and tell young Nancy as a college student? What would be one piece of advice yourself today would want to give your younger self?
Where you end up. I mean, I had no visions of where my life would take me. So I just sort of took advantage of opportunities that came my way. And I'm just amazed at how my career has evolved.
Yeah, you've had a great path, and it's great to see, from where you started. And obviously I wasn't there at the beginning, but fairly early on, and just to kind of see you're still trucking along and doing amazing things for this profession. And that kind of leads to my last curveball question. As a professional, what's your proudest accomplishment as a professional? What is something that really stands out to you to say, I'm really proud that I did that?
I'm really proud that I have a book that's alive and strong 6 editions later. Like I say, I never, young Nancy never had visions of writing a book and being an author. So that just wasn't, it just wasn't on my radar screen. But it's turned out that so much of my career has evolved around writing. And I just think there's so few books that make it past 1 edition, and to have a book that's made it 6 editions is, I think I'm impressed by myself. But that's because I've gotten a lot of support from dietitians, people like you, and a lot of other dietitians that are interested in this field who have recommended the book. A lot of professors have used it as a textbook. And without that support, it never would have stayed alive the way that it has.
Yeah. So as we mentioned to all of our listeners, be sure to pick up Nancy Clark's Sports Nutrition Guidebook. I think you mentioned 6th edition. It's going to be it's in the show notes, so be sure to check that out if you just want. And what I love about this book, it's it's not a book that is only for dietitians. Anyone could read this book. And that's what's so important is a lot of our professionals write books and it's really scientific based, and which is important for us. But for the everyday individual to say, can I pick this book up and apply this? Absolutely. And I think that's what's so critical. So if you're a runner, if you play football, any sport, there are some incredible principles in here that you really need to look at. Nancy, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Incredible information. Honored to have you here. And we hope to have you back in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Tavis, and keep up your good work because you're doing really great things for all these high school athletes.
Thank you so much. It was great to have you, and we will see you soon.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.